Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another live show. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong, and as you can see, I am joined by Alexander Mercouris and Alex Christoforou of the Duran. Good afternoon, good evening, gentlemen. How are you two doing today?
Good afternoon. Doing very well and very pleased to be here.
Doing great. Happy to be here.
Great. Yes. Appreciate you both taking the time out of your busy schedules. Be sure to hit the like button as you come on, everyone. I want to say hello to all the moderators and to everyone viewing. You can find the Duran's YouTube channel in the video description, as well as all the places to support this work here. So let's begin. The big news right now is Vladimir Zelensky is doing a walk of shame to Washington, where he will or he has already agreed upon the deal, the mineral deal that he has been for a while now rejecting, the $500 billion deal. So it's been quite a rough week for Zelensky, or last few weeks for Zelensky, we should say. And I wanted to first show you this. So this was not a week ago, where he says, and I'm just going to read it. I am not ready to fix. Let me explain why I'm not ready to sign this deal, because we should not recognize grants as debts. Do you like it or not? I negotiated with Biden and negotiated with Congress of the United States. I am grateful to Congress. It was the presence of two parties. So he was very firm about not signing this deal. And then suddenly, guys, and I want to play this, he was talking about even resigning from office. And here is that video, which I'll play in full very shortly.
України, якщо вам дуже потрібно, щоб я залишив свій пост, я готовий. Друга історія, можу поміняти це на НАТО, якщо є такі умови одразу, щоб довго про це не говорити. Я фокусуюсь на безпеці України сьогодні, а не за 20 років. І не збираюсь бути у влади десятиріччя. Тому
So he doesn't plan to be in power for decades. He will give up his seat for NATO membership or peace, supposedly. So, Alexander, I want to kick it to you. Zelensky was very firm about not signing this deal. Now he is walking to Washington to do exactly that. He said he would give up his power for NATO membership. What is going on with Zelensky? Also, where does this fit into these huge changes that are taking place in the Ukraine conflict, especially vis-a-vis the U.S.-Russia relationship?
Well, I mean, Zelensky is being put through the ringer, and he's putting Ukraine through the ringer as well. I think we need to take a step back. Zelensky came up with this idea back in the summer of trading Ukraine's mineral wealth for continued U.S. support. He spoke about it to Lindsey Graham. He spoke about it to Donald Trump when they met in September in Trump Tower. He brought it up again in his so-called victory plan, which was going to be, that Ukraine would get, continued support from the United States and from NATO, and indeed NATO membership. And in return, the United States would get all the minerals that Ukraine had, or at least a share of them. Well, Trump comes in. He puts aside all the business about NATO entry, victory plans, and all of that. Says, give me the minerals. I need all your minerals, because that's how I'm going to recoup all the money that the United States has invested, has spent on Ukraine up to this point. And Zelensky last week says, no, I'm not prepared to sign this. I don't accept that I've got any debts to you. The bit you just showed. And besides, this whole idea of signing a deal of this kind is intended to give Ukraine security guarantees. And I'm not signing a document like this if I don't get security guarantees from the United States for Ukraine. So the Americans said no. That created a huge row between Zelensky and Trump, as we saw last week. Apparently, what then changed is that he was worked over again by Kellogg, who apparently had 2 further meetings with him. Boris Johnson phoned him and said, for heaven's sake, sign up And Zelensky has signed up. Now, in some ways, and I think this is an important thing to say, the deal he's got or he's going to sign up to, which isn't actually, properly speaking, a deal, but anyway, it's a statement of intent, if you like, is worse than the one he rejected, because the one he rejected at least put an upper limit to the amount of money the US would extract from Ukraine, which was put at $500 billion. Now, that is a ridiculous amount of money. Ukraine could never pay that. But now, apparently, the latest deal is not going to put any kind of upper limit at all. So he's signing off half of Ukraine's mineral wealth to the United States in perpetuity. And the document that he's proposing to sign still doesn't provide Ukraine with security guarantees. What he's hoping for is this is a framework document. There's going to have to be a lot of additional negotiation. He's going to try and trade with that, trying to get the Americans to give security guarantees. But what the document says is actually that the United States will help Ukraine to get security guarantees. That's apparently a clause in the document. I've read it. And of course, if the United States is going to help Ukraine get security guarantees, that by definition means get security guarantees from third parties, the Europeans, not the United States. So what we're going to end up with is a deal where Ukraine pays in perpetuity half the money from its mineral wealth to the United States in perpetuity. The United States extends no security guarantees, and the Europeans provide security guarantees to Ukraine so that the United States can go on extracting this money. I mean, it's just about the worst deal I could imagine. It is terrible.
Yeah, Alex, I want to bring you in here about this. Where do you see this falling in the larger scheme of what's been going on between the United States under Trump vis-a-vis Ukraine, and now, of course, the rapidly changing situation between the U.S. and Russia, which, all of this feels connected. So your thoughts, Alex, on what exactly is going on here? Why all this flip-flopping? Why would Zelensky take such a worse deal at this time?
I don't think he had a choice. I think Alexander explained it. Boris Johnson told him take the deal. Kellogg told him take the deal. I'm sure Waltz and everybody else told him take the deal. I'm sure the Parliament, the Rada, everybody told him take the deal. The Banderites, I'm sure, told him take the deal. I don't think he had any choice. He had to take this deal. It's a terrible deal. It's worse than the first one, and it's not even really about rare earth minerals. The deal says oil, gas, and logistics. To me, that means oil, gas, and ports, Odessa. So my question is, what is Trump going to do with this deal? The way I see it, he's got two options, maybe more, but I think he's going to take this deal. He's going to either go to Russia, and when he's negotiating with Russia, he's going to say, "Look, I have in perpetuity the oil, the gas, the port cities, the logistics. I've got it all." So, and I'm also, by the way, I'm also going to continue to escalate, given the statements that he made yesterday in the Oval Office. So either we sign a deal and we end this war, or else. Or he's going to take the deal and he's going to go to Putin and he's going to say, "Hey, look, Vladimir, I've got all of this stuff from Ukraine. Let's figure out how to end the conflict in Ukraine. Rubio, Lavrov, go figure it out. Istanbul Plus, sign it to get rid of it. Let's put this to bed. And Mr. Putin, let's extract these riches together." It's going to be one of the two. I don't know which one it's going to be, but that's my thinking of it. I mean, I'm looking at this from a business perspective, and I think that's basically what we're going to have to wait and see what Trump does with this.
Yeah, we've been hearing about also Russia maybe intimating to the United States, to the Trump administration, that they could cooperate together on this kind of extraction on the Russian side of things, where ostensibly Russia, especially in the territories that Russia holds, there are a good amount of these minerals. Alexander, how do these things relate?
Can I just add real quick, Danny? Just one
Yeah.
thing before Alexander jumps in.
Sure.
The only country that can help make this deal a success is Russia. I just want to add that in there. It's the only country that can help make this a success.
Yeah, Alexander.
Well, a success for the United States. Let's be absolutely clear about this, because I mean it's difficult to see how the Ukrainians come out well from this. However you cut it. Now, I think that this is all about bargaining, and I think this is all about bargaining with the Russians to some extent as well. I think this is where this is going. The point is that the United States is not giving Ukraine security guarantees. It's passing the burden on to the Europeans. Yes, they're talking about some kind of escalations, but it doesn't really look to me as if the United States has any real intention to go down the road of continuing to support Ukraine. So this is part of a big negotiation between the Russians, the Ukrainians, and at the same time, it puts Zelensky in his place. That's all there is.
Yeah, and you know, given that situation that you just outlined, Alexander, I mean, can we talk about then what are these bargaining chips? Because Alex, you mentioned that Trump has been saying a whole lot, and I can actually play that video that you shared on your X because I think it's really important. We're hearing so many conflicting things from Donald Trump himself. Here is what he had to say about the conflict.
And lots of equipment, military equipment, and the right to fight on, and originally the right to fight. Look, Ukraine, I will say they're very brave and they're good soldiers, but without the United States and its money and its military equipment, this war would have been over in a very short period of time. In fact, I was the one that gave the javelins. You remember the famous javelins? That was me. That wasn't Obama. It wasn't Biden. It wasn't anybody else. It was me. And they wiped out a lot of tanks with those javelins. And the expression was that Obama gave sheets and I gave the javelins. That was a big deal at the time. It wiped out. That was the beginning when people said, wow, that's something. Well, that was American equipment. Without American equipment, this war would have been over very quickly. And American money, too. I mean, a lot of money.
So that war fighting equipment and the ammunition, that's sustained going forward for Ukraine? And how long is it sustained?
Well, it could go forward for a while, and maybe until we have a deal with Russia. Look, we need to have a deal with Russia, otherwise it's going to continue. But now, when Americans put up their money, the taxpayer money, and the president approves it, we're getting our money back in some form. But it could go on for a while, or.
So, gentlemen, I don't know who wants to jump in first, Alex or Alexander. What I'm hearing is the arming of Ukraine could go on for a while unless there's a deal. Also hearing that people in the United States are going to get their money back, which I think also is a questionable claim, given the terms of what this mineral deal really is. Really are. So whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, the first thing is that while the war goes on, the Americans aren't going to get anything. I mean, it is by definition the case. The United States, as Donald Trump has always said, has provided a huge amount of military equipment and the rest to Ukraine, and Ukraine is losing the war, and the Russians are bombing and launching drone strikes and missile strikes right across Ukraine. We've talked about the port of Odessa. The port of Odessa cannot function properly whilst this war is underway. So the Americans aren't going to get their money until the war ends. And Donald Trump saying to, the press corps, well, if the United States hadn't been giving all this equipment to Ukraine, the war would have ended long ago. He's absolutely right about that, by the way. But it has a kind of godfather-ish quality to my mind, because what he's saying to Zelensky is, look, we've got this deal with you now. We want our money. We want peace. Therefore, you've got to end this war. And that's really what he's, I think, moving towards. He's telling Zelensky, do a deal with the Russians, because this is how we're going to get our money. If you don't do that deal with the Russians, we won't get our money and we won't be pleased with you.
Alex, your thoughts on this? I know that you
I
posted it.
Yeah, I agree with Alexander. I just think that Trump, he just the comment about the javelins to me is he just reverted back to his 2020 campaign when he was bragging about how much weapons he gave to Ukraine, and no one was harder on Putin and Russia than I was. I mean, it's true. It's a statement of fact. He did give the javelins to Ukraine. He did escalate with Russia back then when he was president. He provided lethal weapons, but you don't have to bring it up now that you are in negotiations or about to begin negotiations with Russia and with Putin. I think Trump continues to make these unforced errors, and I'm sure the Russians understand this. I'm sure the Kremlin's looking at this and they're saying, "Okay, we'll brush it off." But they are gonna. I mean, they are gonna listen to what Trump said, and I think they are going to say, we need to be even harder in the negotiations on the U.S. I mean, it was such an own goal, but this is Trump. It reminded me of the jab, and that he just couldn't get it out of his head. Don't talk about the jab. Don't, no, it's my jab. I made it. I did it. I came up with it. Warp speed or whatever. I mean, he just gets stuck in this frame of mind where he just sabotages himself. So I mean, the comment about the javelins was just completely misplaced, and it was I consider it to be a mistake, and I think the Russians are going to jump on this, or they're going to take note of this when they negotiate with Trump. And as Trump said about a week ago, Russia has all the cards. They have all the cards.
Yes.
The U.S. has no cards.
Yeah, just to say very quickly, Alex is absolutely right. The Russians won't like it at all. And one has to remember, it's not just Putin. I mean, Putin perhaps can take it, but there's lots of other people in Russia. And what they're hearing is the American president bragging about how many Russians he's killed. So that isn't going to go down well in Russia, just to say.
Yeah, and I also wanted to make note of, because a lot of people, I think, in the audience are wondering about why Ukraine military aid continues even from the prior Biden administration. This kind of arming of Ukraine, and Trump here says pretty explicitly that it's just going to continue on and on and on until there's a deal. That's why we need a deal fast. Is that a negotiating ploy, or is there something else going on? Because there's a lot of suspicions about, well, does Trump mean what he says here? He's in a very precarious position. He came into the presidency with this big mandate. But negotiations, I've heard you, Alexander, maybe you could comment on this. Russia not only has all the cards, but it has pretty big demands that it's going to want met. What do you make of these comments of continuing to arm Ukraine for as long as it takes to get a deal, which could take a while?
Yeah. I mean, the point is this, and this is what Trump needs to understand. And sometimes he talks as if he does understand it, and other times, like you just saw, he doesn't, which is that, of course, the Russians don't have to do a deal, not in order to achieve their objectives. Yes, they're taking losses, but they've taken losses already, and they can go on taking their losses. Yes, the Russians would prefer the weapons to Ukraine to stop, but they are winning the war despite the fact that all those weapons have already been supplied. The Russians want a deal, but not at any price. And they made their demands extremely clear. Lavrov repeated them again yesterday, and I believe once again this morning. They're not going to retreat from this position. So if Trump wants to negotiate with the Russians, like his friend Steve Witkoff has said, he's got to start addressing Russian ideas and Russian concerns, and not making the kind of unforced errors that, as Alex says, he has just made, and not think that, by talking about giving Ukraine endless weapons, that's going to work in the end to Trump's own advantage. I've said this before, and I want to say this again. This is diplomacy and negotiations between superpowers. You cannot conduct this in the way that you would conduct the kind of commercial contract or real estate deal that Donald Trump is familiar with. The Russians are incredibly tough, very, very formidable negotiators. Anybody who's had experience of negotiating with the Russians in any capacity, in a private commercial capacity, certainly in a foreign policy diplomacy capacity, will know that they will negotiate very toughly, very thoroughly. And if negotiators come in talking in that kind of way, they will simply cut them to pieces.
Yeah, well, Alex, we're hearing that there's going to be another round of talks. I believe it is Thursday, February 27th. Given what you've heard from Trump, what's your reaction to what Alexander just said, as well as the continuation of U.S. policy toward Ukraine as Trump attempts to negotiate and his team attempts to negotiate?
Well, Alexander just put up a video on his channel, and he explains that the talks that are going to happen in Turkey, actually in Istanbul, they're not going to focus so much on Ukraine. Actually, I don't think they're going to focus on Ukraine at all, but they're going to be about normalizing the relations, especially with regard to the embassies, the embassies, the U.S. embassy in Moscow, the Russian embassy in the United States. From what I understand, they don't even have an ambassador there on site, and they're terribly understaffed. So the negotiations that are going to happen tomorrow, from my understanding and listening to Alexander, he could probably elaborate on this a bit more, they're going to focus on the normalization part of the relationship between Russia and the United States, which is a good thing. I mean, this is a good thing. We've always said on the Duran for the past 3 months that the way the Trump team should approach negotiations with Russia is that Ukraine, though it is the most important part right now, they should make Ukraine one of many parts in the discussion. I mean, they have a lot of things that they need to talk about. And the first thing that they need to do is they need to establish normal diplomatic relationships, because Biden did a lot of damage. He did a lot of damage, that guy. So they need to get back to normal diplomatic relationship, and then they can start getting into the details of Ukraine. So that's what's going to happen tomorrow. But just to go off of what Alexander said, everyone understands that Trump is the art of the deal. We all get it. He's a transactional guy. We get it. But I think he's taken the transaction thing just a bit too far. Alexander's right. It's transactional. We understand. We want money. We'll give you weapons or whatever. Or we want a minerals deal. But you can't be completely transactional when conducting diplomacy. It just doesn't work. And I think if there's one person on the Trump team that has a good understanding so far as to what's going on and what the Russians are looking for, I would say it is Steve Witkoff. That's probably the guy that he should lean on the most. But that's just my opinion as to how I see it.
Yeah.
I don't know if Alexander wants to explain.
No, I absolutely
tomorrow.
I absolutely know. It's absolutely correct. I mean, what happened was when they met in Riyadh last week, they went through all the various issues that they needed to talk about. They agreed that the first priority is to get communications going, resume proper communications between Russia and the United States. I know this for an absolute fact. When the Russians try to contact the Americans, they have to contact the Americans by email. The Americans under Biden wouldn't even pick up the telephone. That was how bad things had got. So there was hardly any communication at all. There is no Russian ambassador in Washington. There is no American ambassador in Moscow. The two embassies are barely functioning. And we've had this incredibly dangerous period over the last 3 years when there's been really no diplomatic contacts with the Russians at all, except I think the military chiefs have spoken twice and the defense ministers have spoken twice. And at one point, Lavrov had a disastrous meeting with Blinken, which lasted all of 15 minutes at the fringe of, I think it was a G20 meeting. So, I mean, this has been a complete disaster of not having contacts. And when the Russians went to Riyadh, apparently they said this is the first priority. We've got to sort out the embassies. We've got to establish a situation such as we had during the Cold War, where there is a constant, regular dialogue between us. And they also looked at various other topics that they needed to discuss. Ukraine was one. Economic relations was another, sanctions, Iran, the Middle East, North Korea, whatever. And they agreed that going forward, they would set up expert teams, and the Americans would also appoint a representative to speak to the Russians on Ukraine-related matters, which so far, by the way, the Americans have not done. So that was what was agreed in Riyadh. It was very much that kind of very important procedural meeting. Now, we're going to have this first follow-up meeting tomorrow, which is going to be about sorting out the embassies. And then hopefully, fairly soon after, there's going to be a further meeting of experts. And that will pave the way for Putin and Trump to meet, perhaps sometime in March. And hopefully that will start to take this whole process of normalization further. But none of this solves Ukraine, the problem of Ukraine. The Americans and the Russians do need to talk about Ukraine with each other. The American stance at the moment seems to be, well, it's for the Ukrainians and the Russians to do that by themselves. The Russians have always said, we're prepared to talk to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians refuse to talk to the Russians. That is the stumbling block. And the Americans need somehow to address that. And even if that happens, even if the Americans and the Russians do talk to each other, sooner or later, the Americans are going to inevitably find that they have to be involved in that process as well, because they are the critical stakeholder on the Ukrainian side. They can't just walk away from it in that kind of way.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, it's for the Russians and the Ukrainians to figure out Trump's mentality. Also, a big part of this is Europe and getting Europe to figure it out, so to speak, and almost the United States wiping its hands with the conflict. But what I wanted to play is a comment that Donald Trump made during Emmanuel Macron's very awkward visit to Washington, where he talks about the peacekeeping troops. And this has been a conversation that's been happening since the negotiations or any kind of context have been made about perhaps settling this conflict. But this is what Trump had to say.
Will you convince Putin to accept the European troops as peacekeeper? Would you think?
Yeah, he will accept that.
He will accept
I've
it.
asked him that question.
You talk to me?
I've asked him that question.
He said yes?
trying to lift the block on the.
Because he's not, look, if we do this deal, he's not looking for World War. He doesn't mind, but I've specifically asked him that question. He has no problem with it.
He's trying to lift.
So Vladimir Putin has no problem with Europe placing peacekeeping troops in Ukraine in the eventual lead or in the eventual event of a peace settlement here. I don't know if Alexander, Alex, you want to begin just to react to this, because this is something that I believe Russia has been very firmly opposed to since I can remember this comment, this idea being floated.
The Russians are very firmly opposed to it now. Lavrov has just spoken about it. He's completely categorically rejected it. I don't know what Trump is talking about, because I don't believe that the Russians are saying in private something different to what they're saying in public on this question. So when Trump says that Putin agreed to it, I don't believe he did. I think Trump has probably misunderstood something that Putin said, or perhaps he's coming up with things. I mean, I simply don't know. But I was reading the comments that Lavrov made yesterday in a press conference he gave in Qatar. And he could not have been more clear that the Russians do not agree to peacekeepers, that they consider this a device to prolong the war, that Macron and Starmer are trying to trick Trump by bringing up the topic of peacekeepers. And by the way, this word expression trick was simultaneously used about this whole same topic in articles that appeared in the Daily Telegraph. So again, I just don't understand where Trump got that idea from. The one thing I did think was that maybe he's confused the question of European peacekeepers in Ukraine with the question of Ukraine entering the European Union. Now, the Russians have not in the past objected to that. They've still sticking somewhat to that position. And it may be that Trump misunderstood something that Putin said on this. But even there, the latest comments from the Russians, from Peskov, who's Putin's spokesman, suggests that the Russians are edging away from that position too. So I don't understand what Trump is saying here. I'm sure he's wrong.
Yeah, Alex, your thoughts about also the consequences of this, because the idea, even just the idea of European peacekeepers, this is almost laughable to me, because how for how long, even up until this day, you hear the UK saying and other EU countries saying, I know UK is not in the EU anymore, saying that they're going to send troops to Ukraine. What's the difference between a peacekeeping troops in Ukraine versus just Europe sending troops to Ukraine? Like for Russia, I feel like they've made the distinction that there really is no difference, that it is an existential threat to them.
No, Russia has said they're not going to allow any European, NATO, EU forces in Ukraine. And there's not going to be a ceasefire as well. They've said this 1,000 times. But what Starmer and Macron are trying to do is they're trying to convince Trump to provide some sort of support and security, a backstop, as Starmer calls it. And then they're going to send a reassurance force. They're not even calling it peacekeepers anymore. It's a reassurance force. And that's what they want. They want the United States to sign off on security and support. And that way, France and the UK and other European countries that go along with this, they can send the troops to Ukraine. And then when Russia goes after those troops, because they will consider them enemy combatants, Macron and Starmer will run to Trump crying and begging Trump to take action. That's the whole purpose of all of this. That's all this is about. And they believe that they can get Trump to agree to this. And they believe they can get Trump to agree to this because Trump makes comments like what the comment he just made, where he talks about, I talked to Putin and he agreed to have peacekeepers, or I gave them the javelins. Every time Trump comes out with these comments, Macron and Starmer and Ursula and all these people, Duda, they all say, oh, there you go. We can change his mind. You see, we can change his mind. What Trump needs to do is he needs to come out with very short, simple statements, statements which say we're working with Russia, we're negotiating with Russia, we're going to end this war. This is not my war. This is Biden's war. And that's all he should say. That's all he should say. He should not, when the press asks him about Ukraine, he should not even answer the questions. He should pass it off to Rubio, pass it off to Witkoff, pass it off to whoever. But he should not answer, because he just digs himself into a hole. And the Europeans see this and they believe that they can change his mind. And maybe they can. I don't know. You know, Bolton changed his mind. He went all the way to North Korea. He crossed over to the other side, and then Bolton told him, scrap everything. And Trump scrapped everything. So you don't know. You really don't know if he's going to change his mind. But it doesn't matter, because Russia should look at all of this and they should take everything into account and take all precautions. And whatever happens, Russia should continue to focus on winning the conflict, whether it's political or whether it's militarily. That should be the Russian focus. We'll see. We'll see what Trump does with this deal. Once he has this deal, we'll see what the next steps are. And with Trump, you have to always look at his actions. You have to give him some credit as well, because he got dialogue going. He called Putin. We had a meeting in Riyadh. You have to give him a lot of credit. He's restoring diplomatic relations. The vote at the UN was huge. Russia and the United States voting together in the United Nations. So, I mean, Trump deserves a lot of credit. His team deserves a lot of credit. But when he talks, he digs himself a hole, and he needs to stop, because this was his choice. He decided that he wanted to negotiate this. We said on our channel for many months, the easiest path for Ukraine, what people voted for, is to just walk away. That was the easiest path for Trump in the United States, to just walk away. Not my war. Biden started it. I've got other things to do. I've got to look after America. But he decided he wanted to negotiate. And Steve Bannon even said it the other day in an interview, that Trump wanted to negotiate because Trump in his head, this is what Bannon said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said Trump in his head sees himself as the negotiator. He wants to negotiate. Okay, he chose this path. So now we all have to go along on this ride and see where it leads. But it can be dangerous because he can be convinced to go in a different direction. He's done it in the past, and I think Macron and Stamer see that.
Well, yep. Alexander, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was just rereading Lavrov's comments about this, and he said that the approach promoted by the Europeans, first of all, France, is aimed at prolonging the conflict and thwarting any attempts to de-escalate. Macron's approach is clearly wrong. And as for deployment of peacekeepers, we cannot and will not consider any such option. And then he goes on to say, that he'd heard from the press conference that this can only happen if it's agreed by both sides, meaning, I suppose, us and Ukraine, but nobody consulted us on the matter. So that appears to contradict exactly what Trump said, that he agreed it with Putin. So, I mean, they've wheeled out Lavrov to say that because Putin doesn't want to come out and say Trump is lying. But Lavrov is clearly contradicting what Trump has just said. And I agree with Alex. I mean, you've got to be very careful what you say before you enter into a negotiation like this, especially with a side like the Russians, who note everything down, listen to what you say, have been very, very badly burnt by the fact that the Americans come and say one thing one day, do something the next. If they get the sense, if they develop the idea that Trump cannot be trusted, that he's going to change course from one day to the other in exactly the way that Trump said, that Alex said, they will say to themselves, well, there's no real point in continuing with this. This isn't going to go anywhere. Let's just go on with the war and win.
Yeah. And that's what I wanted to ask about is this, what is it that you believe is compelling Trump to approach this in this way? Because I think, Alex, you make a really good point that the United States, if it wanted to, could actually walk away from this conflict because it doesn't hold any cards to Russia necessarily in negotiations, but it's so deep in it is the root cause, to use Russian terms. It is really the root cause of this conflict. So it has the ability to walk away. However, Donald Trump is not doing that. He is negotiating. So maybe, Alexander, you can start here. Is there something else behind this? Alex floated the idea of him maybe reversing course. I know a lot of people are suspicious about this. I, for one, am also share your enthusiasm about these are big changes. I think that regardless of even what happens from here, the fact that the U.S. was compelled under Trump to reverse course, especially diplomatically, is a significant thing. However, the Chinese also say this, like, well, you say one thing and then you do another. Do you see that this could be a possibility, Alexander? Because it seems like there are all kinds of various traps, whether it's the arms, the comments that he makes, the way he deals with Europe with kind of like a carrot and stick. I mean, there's so many elements to this. Alexander, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that Trump looks to me at the moment to be fully in control of his administration. I mean, it wasn't the same in the first administration, the first Trump administration. I mean, Bolton was a powerful figure within it, independent of Trump, with completely different, in fact, contradictory ideas. He had lots of allies within the bureaucracy who were assisting him. And that meant that he could bring pressures on Trump, which cannot be brought to the same extent today. So it depends more on Trump himself than it has done at any point now. He is in pole position to make the decisions. And you're absolutely correct. If you're talking about the war, if you're talking about the negotiation with the Russians, specifically on the issue of Ukraine, the Russians hold all the strong cards. They do. But if you're talking about the US's relationship with Ukraine and with the Europeans, it's unequivocally clear that it's the US that holds all the strong cards. Now, it seems to me that a viable course for Trump to take would be this. He can see that the war is being lost. I'm sure he's getting that information now. He's probably got all kinds of wrong information about Russian losses, the Russian economy overheating and perhaps collapsing and doing things of that kind. But gradually, hopefully, he'll come to realize that this isn't really what's going on, at least not in the way that he thinks it is. So I think he could try and get a negotiation going between the Ukrainians and the Russians. The Ukrainians will almost certainly resist negotiating with the Russians. If negotiations do begin, they probably won't go anywhere very far because, frankly, the Ukrainians have no real desire to negotiate with the Russians at all. And I think at that point, if he is wise, Trump could follow the advice of Steve Bannon, and not just Steve Bannon, but many other people, and say, look, the United States has done everything it possibly can. It gave Ukraine all those weapons. It signed all these advantageous deals with Ukraine. It's tried to persuade the Ukrainians to negotiate. They won't negotiate. This is not our problem. It's Europe's problem. It's Ukraine's problem. At the end of the day, we've only done as much as can be done. We're going to walk away and leave it to the Europeans and the Ukrainians to sort it out between them. He can do that, or he can threaten to do that, and that might have an effect. But he's got to be clear in his mind that that is his fallback position if a negotiation doesn't succeed. And I'm not convinced at the moment that he does.
Yeah, Alex, your thoughts?
No, the Europeans and the UK, they want this. I mean, that's what they're signaling.
No.
They want this war. So if you're Trump, you do everything that Alexander said. You go through the motions. You try to get Zelensky to negotiate with Putin. He's not. I think we all know he's not. Zelensky's not going to negotiate. Is not going to negotiate with Putin. The Europeans are not going to let him negotiate with Putin. Boris Johnson's not going to let him negotiate with Putin. Stammer's not. I mean, they're not going to let him. He doesn't want to. The Banderites are not going to let him. And the negotiation is not even going to start. It's not even going to start. And then Trump has another, because he's had many opportunities. USAID was another great opportunity for Trump to walk away from Ukraine. It's corrupt. USAID, all of this stuff, Doge, we're out of this. But fine, he'll have another opportunity to tell the UK and to tell the EU, you guys want this war, take this war, we're out. We tried our best. But we need, and the message he needs to get out there, and he needs to be very clear. We tried our best. We've normalized relations with Russia. We need now to discuss other things that are important for peace and stability in the world with Russia and with China. And so UK, Stammer, Ursula, Macron, you guys can figure this out now. That is the right approach for him to take. And we've done probably a dozen shows talking about this, probably a dozen shows going 4 to 5 months back, talking about the opportunity that Trump has to disengage for Ukraine. And at the end of the day, this is what the American people want. This is what they want. They don't want to get bogged down in Ukraine. And going back to Steve Bannon, in his interview, he even said, when he was asked by, I believe it was Michael Tracy, actually, who was interviewing him, when he was asked about Trump walking away, Steve Bannon said, yes, I want him to walk away. And he said, I'm even getting to the point where I don't even care about the money. This is pretty much what Bannon said. He said, it's getting so frustrating and it's getting so dangerous that Trump's going to get bogged down in this, and he's going to change his mind that, I don't even care about all the money that was lost. We should just call it quits. That was what he pretty much said. People can look up the interview, but we've been saying this, me and Alexander, for about 4 or 5 months on multiple shows. So, he's got an opportunity to disengage from this, to solve it. If he can't solve it, then he's got an opportunity to disengage. And, Macron, Stammer, they want this conflict. They're itching for a fight with Russia. They're itching for a fight with Putin.
I wanted to actually raise this because I agree. Trump does have an opportunity, and I would love to see the United States function normally with Russia, with China, even if it is simply a temporary reprieve because the United States simply cannot fight Russia or China. I think it would be a positive thing for the world, even temporarily, for that to occur. I guess my suspicion, however, from what I'm seeing in such a rapid time develop, is that could Trump here be laying the groundwork for just a new direction to take relations with Russia that, on the one hand, for the time being, represent a positive development, but on the other, maybe the United States kind of regrouping so that when the change of mind happens that you've brought up so many times, Alex, the United States is more prepared to be confrontational again. I mean, I know this might be a bit speculative, but my suspicions are that there are a lot of considerations happening here that may have not so much to do with the Ukraine conflict ending for the U.S.'s sake. What Trump is saying, this is not our conflict, all of this, it might more be a reorientation, so to speak. Alexander, do you have any comments on this?
The answer, your point is one that's been made all the time in Russia itself by all sorts of people. There's just been an article written by a Russian journalist called Fyodor Lukyanov, who has always been on the liberal, engage with the West side of the political spectrum in Russia. And he's just written an article in which he says we can't fall into a romance with the United States. That would be a huge mistake for us to do. If we did that, we would sour all our friendships and alliances with all the various friends that we've made. Now, we would compromise the momentum within our own economy. We would disarm ourselves, in effect. And we can't rely on the United States following through with this. They might indeed turn on us again. So the Russians are very well aware of this. And if Lukyanov, as I said, is very much, historically, was very, very much on the engage with the West side of the spectrum, is saying this, you can be sure that there's an awful lot of other people in the Russian political system, in the Kremlin, who are saying this too. I don't think the Russians are going to disarm in that sort of way. I think that they will be deeply suspicious long term of where all this is going. They've said already many times that trust between them and the Americans has basically fallen apart. But looking at this in terms of narrow Russian national interests, it is nonetheless, I think, useful to them to have a constant dialogue with the Americans. And if they can reach a deal which the Americans will support, which satisfies Russian security concerns in Europe, which resolves the problem of Ukraine in a way that is satisfactory to the Russians, well, why would they not take it, even if they know or fear that in the future the relationship with the United States would sour again? Take what you can now, worry about the problems later, but absolutely don't disarm. I think that's the mood in Moscow.
Yeah, any thoughts about that, Alex?
I mean, I think that if Russia gets Istanbul Plus, which is what Putin laid out in June, I mean, these are Russia's terms. If they get that, if they get the terms of Istanbul Plus, along with sanctions relief and elections in Ukraine, and perhaps a government that's friendly to Russia. I mean, we don't know. We have to see how all of this plays out. But if that happens, then yeah, this is going to be a big win for Russia, a huge win for Russia. And these are their terms. These are not my terms or Alexander's terms or your terms, Daddy. This is what Putin said in June, and this has been Russia's consistent terms since then. Istanbul Plus, the four oblasts, denazification, demilitarization, and the four oblasts in their entirety. And full sanctions relief, which was not in their terms in June. They haven't even talked about sanctions, the Russians. When you ask the Russians about sanctions, they say, we don't even discuss it. But if they even get sanctions relief along with the elections and a friendly government in Kiev, then yeah, Russia has to take it. Absolutely. But we have a ways to go, I believe, to get there. Maybe not, though. Who knows? Maybe the plan is for Trump to say, yeah, let's do Istanbul Plus and let's get to some business now that I have this mineral deal in my hands. Who knows? We don't know. But I think it's safe to say, and I think this is where Alexander's 100% right. I think it's safe to say that Russia and China and BRICS and India, they know the game. I mean, they know what's up. They've all been burned in the past before. Understandably, they've been burned. I mean, we can go through, we don't need to go through it all, but they know what's up. They've got the best of the smartest people in the Kremlin. They got the best diplomats. They understand the game. So I'm not so worried about the Russia side. What I'm saying is, I'm saying America first, Trump, stay focused. Don't lose sight of what you were voted to do. I think that's key. Don't get bogged down in this mess. You see how much time Ukraine is already taking from Trump. I mean, it's already taking up too much time, and his platform is huge. It's massive. Just the U.S. component is a huge job. So I think this is what we should all be looking at from the Russian side of things. You have Putin and Lavrov and Medvedev and Zaharov. I mean, this is like the best team out there. So I wouldn't worry too much about what's going to happen on the Russian side.
Yeah. Well, there's just news now that the European Union has been slapped with 25% tariffs on imports by the Trump administration. Of course, Europe has been absolutely shellacked by the Trump administration since it came into office. I wanted to ask you, Alexander, about the bigger implications, not just of tariffs, but really this entire shift, because a lot of people are wondering about what is the United States' posture now? Because on the one hand, it looks as if, and Alex has raised really good points about the possibility of even sanctions being relieved on Russia. You have these massive tariffs that are being slapped on so-called allies like Europe. It is a different situation, at least, and much different looking than just the administration prior. But at the same time, there's also suspicions about, well, is the United States moving now to take a kind of a break to normalize with Russia so that it can prepare for the wars to come? Because a lot of people are wondering about, well, is the United States now a part of this multipolar world? It just voted with Russia and China at the United Nations about the Ukraine conflict. However, there's a lot of comments about China. The communist Chinese are the biggest threats to national security. Alexander, how do you make sense of this?
I think we are in a transition away from what might be called the globalist, unipolar kind of thinking, which has failed. And I think that there is an understanding which goes beyond the Trump administration, by the way. If you follow the various foreign policy magazines in the United States, you can see it there. There's a trend which says, look, this idea of trying to reshape the entire world around us to make ourselves, the center, which would dictate things to everybody, that's gradually fading. And we tried it. We tried it very hard for 30 years. It weakened, it hollowed out our own industrial base. It caused distortions in our own economy. Our armed forces are not really up to this impossible project either. It's involved us in far too many things in far too many places that didn't work out for us well. So I think what the thinking is in the United States is let's start behaving a bit more like a conventional great power, a big, powerful superpower. Let's follow our interests. Let's not worry too much about the collective West anymore. So if we judge that reindustrializing our economy is best achieved through tariffs, let's impose those tariffs. Let's not worry about whether the French and the Germans are hurt by that or whether this is something that they're annoyed about. That's their problem. Our problems are at home and we need to sort them out. But this reimagining of the United States as a great power and a great power amongst several other great powers does not mean that the United States is disarming. The nature of what is being done means that the United States intends to remain a great power and intends to pursue, sometimes quite aggressively, in fact, sometimes very aggressively, its own interests. And if they feel that they have a conflict with China, then they will take a very aggressive and hard line with China. And at the moment, it might be in their interests to patch up relations with Russia, but that might not be forever. It's a more fluid international system than the one we have seen, one where there are no permanent friends, perhaps no permanent enemies either, but where there are rivals and adversaries and occasional partners. And that's a system with which, if you are familiar with history, most of us who do history are familiar with.
Yeah, Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much more to add than what Alexander said. I think he's got this spot on.
Yeah. Well, now that we are in this kind of shifting moment, we also see how this has impacted Europe, but it's also, we also have China looking at this, very enthusiastic, of course, about peace negotiations, but also very concerned about the way that Trump is handling the economic realm of this, because while on the one hand, a lot of the tariffs and whatnot, the rhetoric has been targeted at Europe, has been targeted at allies like Canada. There's also the fact that China has seen an increase of about 10% on tariffs of its own imports. So whoever wants to begin, I mean, what is your take on the larger impact that this Trump moment is having on this changing world? Is it having any? Because some worry that the play here is almost like reverse Kissinger, right? Get close to one of the so-called adversaries in order to take out the other. And so I'm wondering about your assessment of how you see that, given the flurry of developments that have been going on between Trump and Russia.
Well, briefly, the Russians and the Chinese are very well aware that this is partly, I mean, there is an element of this, the reverse Kissinger, draw Russia away from China, create splits within the BRICS, try to undermine their strategic partnership and all of that. Now, I don't get the sense that the Chinese at the state level are particularly worried about this, but the Russians, at any rate, have gone out of their way in the last couple of days to reassure the Chinese that the relationship between China and Russia is unchanged, that it is exactly as it was, that it is as strong as ever. So we've had meetings between Wang Yi and Lavrov, and we've had a telephone call between Xi Jinping and Putin. Now, the interesting thing about that call is that Xi Jinping and Putin, I have heard, speak very regularly to each other, but they don't usually provide readouts of their cause. And on this occasion, they did. And the Russians went out of their way to say, again, in their readout, that the status of the strategic partnership was reaffirmed and that the atmosphere in the call was a warm and a friendly one. So I think that if there is any real plan to do a reverse Kissinger moment, it isn't going to work. The reason Kissinger was successful in playing the Chinese off against the Soviets in the 1970s was, of course, because relations between the Soviets and the Chinese at that time were already extremely bad. There'd been border clashes. There was a ferocious ideological dispute. The two countries, Russia, the Soviet Union and China, were barely talking to each other. There were threats of fighting on the border, all that kind of thing. So it was easy for Kissinger to go to Beijing and try to persuade the Chinese to, align a bit with the United States against Russia and do all of those things. This time, today, relations between Russia and China are extremely good. In fact, they're excellent. So that doesn't really create the space for the kind of reverse Kissinger ploy that people sometimes are talking about. Now, about the economics of this, obviously, China is the world's great exporter of manufactured goods. They're not going to be pleased with any of this. They don't want to see barriers going up that could restrict trade around the world. But ultimately, that is what the BRICS is all about. It's about creating an alternative trade system so that China can continue its trade, it can develop its relations, it can continue to grow its economy, and it becomes less dependent on exports to the United States. So it's not as if the Chinese don't have a plan to deal with this problem, however inconvenient to them it might be.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the battlefield if we could, because we have, Russia advancing all along the front lines. There's been significant movement in Kursk. How is this battlefield situation going to influence these negotiations between the U.S. and Russia? Because one of the things I've said, I'd like your reaction to, is that there's one reality that I believe, even if I don't, with Trump, he can say one thing, do another. He can actually do what he says, and then he can actually do the opposite of what he says. It's hard to understand where he's going to go, but generally his track record has not been very good up until, I would say, as on the question of Russia, up until his most recent term. So I am holding out still suspicion and criticism until I see this play out. But the battlefield reality is playing out. And one thing that the Trump administration, I believe, has to consider is if this goes on long enough, then he may be in office when it all collapses on the battlefield, which is a disastrous thing to happen for an administration, Trump, who called himself a peacemaker and he was going to get this done in 24 hours. So if you could speak about the battlefield realities, I don't know whoever wants to go first, and how they're going to shape what's to come between the U.S. and Russia.
I'll be quite brief here. The battlefield realities are what have shaped the entire discussion. It is because the Russians are advancing and advancing steadily, and that we now have a developing crisis in Kursk and problems with the Ukrainian troops there, and it's looking like they're surrounded or becoming close to being surrounded in Kursk and all of that sort of thing. It's because we have the battlefield realities that we have. It's because nobody any longer seriously believes that Ukraine can win the war, that we're talking about negotiations. It's because the United States failed through its proxy war to defeat Russia or to weaken Russia. Russia has got stronger, that we're now seeing serious attempts being made to achieve a détente. Now, if that doesn't happen, if we don't have peace agreed in Ukraine, then sooner or later there will be a military collapse by Ukraine and the Russians will win. the priority for Donald Trump, I would have thought at that time, if it happens within the next 4 years, is to put him as much distance between himself and that event as possible, which is where we come back to handing it over to the Europeans, who, as Alex absolutely rightly says, look as if they are keen to own this problem. So when the disaster comes, you could say, well, the Europeans took it, they own it, it's their problem. It's nothing to do with me. And that's the line. That's one further reason why Trump should want to distance himself from this debacle. That's my view.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alex.
Exactly. No, exactly. And I think the situation in Kursk is critical for the Zelensky regime. If in the next couple of weeks the Russians do push the Ukraine out of Kursk, or if they close the cauldron and Ukraine cannot retreat from Kursk, because we are getting information that they're now trying to retreat from Kursk because the situation is so bad. But if Kursk is resolved, then Zelensky is in very deep trouble, because he's been basing his entire negotiating position on Kursk. I'll give Russia Kursk, and they can give me a territory. And look at us, we're in Kursk, so we can still fight, and we've taken the war to Russian territory. I mean, he's basing everything off of this catastrophe, this debacle, this failure, this trap, this Russian military trap that is Kursk. Because Zelensky is a clown. He's a clown. Every decision he makes is wrong. But if he loses Kursk, then he's in deep trouble. And we could be seeing a collapse in Kiev from the Zelensky regime. I don't know, but to me, I think we should keep an eye out on Kursk, because I think that's built the entire Zelensky UK EU narrative has been built around Kursk. And so if that crumbles, then I don't know where we find ourselves.
Well, Alexander, Russia has basically made clear that it's taking its time with this process, that there's a lot of business that needs to get done between the US and Russia. And even Trump has said, in that video that we played, where he brags about giving javelins to Ukraine back in his first term and all of this, he said there at the end, like, that's why we got to get a deal done fast. But for Russia, it seems that it wants to get the best deal. So how will this play out? That because if the battlefield is going in Russia's way and it wants to get the best deal, then how do you figure that Trump is going to it seems like he's going to have to agree to a deal which is very much along Russia's terms. And do you feel like that's something that Trump, being in the Oval Office, being in Washington, can do? That's that to me, that is one of the more astonishing parts of this moment, is wrapping my head around that possibility. Is it politically feasible to do that, and how could that be done?
Right. Well, we've actually discussed this on the Duran again on several occasions. One of the biggest mistakes, if you want me to say what I think was one of Trump's biggest mistakes at the outset, was that he spoke about doing this deal fast. Now, the Russians, who are under no such pressure, as you rightly say, they're advancing steadily and methodically, their economy is growing. They're under no pressure to do a deal fast. Of course, they saw that. And they said to themselves, as they would, well, this man is very, very keen to go for a deal. And that gives us an advantage over him. We can play along. We can take our time. That will make him even more anxious to do a deal. And then at that point, he's going to start making concessions. I think that was a mistake. I think what Trump should have done after he became president, put aside all the business about ending the war in a day. He should have called Putin, as he did. He should have sent his people to Riyadh, as he did. He should have got the negotiations, the discussions with the Russians underway, as he did. But he should not have gone on, harped on about the necessity of ending the war quickly. I suspect that Trump was influenced in saying all of that because he believed that the Russians really are taking these enormous casualties that the Ukrainians say, and that their economy really is in trouble, as some reporters and economists say. And frankly, he should know by now that you should be very, very careful before you believe any of those things. So I think this is where he made his mistake. Now, talking about the ultimate deal that is going to be done, if you lose a war, if the other side wins, then that is inevitably going to shape the settlement. Any war that is won by one side and lost by the other is going to result in a deal which is going to be to the advantage of the victor. That is the nature of war. Again, Trump could quite validly and properly have said or say when the situation comes that he's done the best he can. He's negotiated from a very weak position. Biden, who brought about this war, Trump correctly says, nothing to do with me. If I'd been president, there wouldn't have been a war. Anyway, that's, I think clever politics of Trump to say that. But Trump could say, Biden gave me a terrible hand. I've played it as well as I can. If the deal is done and it's not perfect, if it's tilted very much in favor of the Russians, well, what do you expect? After all, they were winning. Be grateful to me for the fact that I've managed to do a deal at all, rather than have a complete collapse on our hands, which would have resulted in an unequivocal Russian victory. So I think he's got a defendable and arguable case here, and one which I think a lot of people, especially in the United States, would listen to, because it isn't his war. He didn't start it. He wasn't there when the decisions were made. So he can't ultimately be held responsible for the fact that it's gone so badly.
Yeah. Well, Alex, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just he has to get his messaging down, and I think the messaging that needs to come from Trump is just don't talk about it too much.
Yeah,
don't talk about it. Let the Russians and your administration, your team, talk to each other and see if they can work out the normalization of relations. And I think he needs to say that, because I don't think he says that enough, especially Trump. I don't think I've ever heard Trump say that what we are talking about is not Ukraine. We're talking about normalizing the wrecked relations that Biden created. I mean, it's just so easy. It's so easy. It blows my mind how easy it is. Biden wrecked everything, and he did. Biden was a disaster, a complete disaster, whether you're talking about Russia, whether you're talking about the Middle East, whether you're talking about China. Biden was a disaster. Xi Jinping could not deal with Biden. He hated dealing with Biden. I mean, it's such an easy narrative for the Trump media team or communications team, I don't know, to just tell Trump, this is what you need to say. And then let the Russian diplomatic team help us through this, because he does run the risk of Russia winning militarily, which could happen. It's going to happen, but it could happen very quickly. You never know. And there's no doubt that the Democrats, the mainstream media, the US media, the UK media, my God, the UK media, they're going to try to pin this all on Trump. You stabbed Ukraine in the back. You didn't give them javelins. You didn't give them ATACMS. You didn't let them launch long-range missiles into Moscow. You called Zelensky a dick. They're gonna run with all of that stuff. So that's why he needs to. They need to iron out the message in the next couple of weeks. And to me, it's just talk less about Ukraine and just let us in the background figure this out. And I think everything will be okay. But But you know, what can you say? He likes to talk, and he likes to talk about javelins and to talk about the 800,000 Russian losses. And I mean, you know, it leaves you speechless. Maybe Tulsi Gabbard. Maybe now that you have Tulsi Gabbard giving him his daily briefings, maybe something will change, and maybe he'll start getting some good information on his desk. I don't know.
Well, one of the concerns I've had, and maybe this can be our final talk before we just review what audience members had to say, and then we can get out of here at the 90-minute mark. But one of the concerns, especially, you know, being in the United States and seeing president after president come in, inheriting wars, and then taking initial action that eventually leads to disappointment. One of the concerns I've seen historically with the United States, I think about Richard Nixon. I know, Alex, you said, okay, this could become his war. There's a risk this could become. Well, Richard Nixon came into office. What do you call it? Vietnamization. We're going to transition out, and actually, that transition out wasn't necessarily like U.S. is all out. It was actually shifting the burden of the war onto the Vietnamese allies. While there's no parallel to any wars, and this is the first, I think, since the Cold War, where we have a superpower confrontation. At the same time, we've seen this with Vietnam and Nixon, with Barack Obama coming in, Iraq and Afghanistan. Oh, we're going to end the war. Wait, nope. Surge here, surge there. Oh, and then we get into the same kind of shifting the burden onto so-called allies with heavy U.S. involvement. And then Trump, of course, what came into office, I'm going to pull everyone out. And regardless of why he did not pull all the troops out of Syria and why he didn't end Afghanistan, they eventually, that's kind of how it shook up. Those wars didn't end under him. And then, of course, Alex, I think you summarized Biden pretty well. The neocons had full and total control, and they were waging wars on all fronts, 3+, essentially, with the three biggest powers of the multipolar world, Russia, China, and Iran. So that is to say, I think that is where some of this, there's a lot of confusion, right? I even had some viewers say there's confusion right now about like what exactly is going on. How do we explain this moment? How do you react to this moment in history, Alexander? Given this kind of context I laid out, we have a track record for U.S. presidents, maybe not in the same kind of superpower context, not in the context of what the Ukraine conflict looks like, but in the context of, you know, presidents promising peace and then ending up with something quite different.
Well, this is absolutely correct. And in fact, this is always the risk that the president will simply slip into the slipstream. He'll just follow the line of least resistance. He'll do what the permanent state wants him to do, what the hardliners in Congress want him to do, what the arms lobby wants him to do, what the various media commentators, all of whom ultimately you can put them all together, and you know you can see that they're all neocons. That they want him to do that. They want him to continue the war, to go on fighting the war, and the result is that the United States finds it extremely difficult to extricate itself from these kind of commitments and these problems. Now, JFK, by the way, noticed this problem all the way back in the 1960s, and he was complaining about it. And in his last months, he seemed like he was going to try to take steps to break the pattern. In other words, to assert his authority as president. He'd made a decision, for example, to pull out all US forces from Vietnam. Of course, they weren't the hundreds of thousands that came later, but he started to shift policy. He started to shift gears in terms of relations with the Soviet Union. But this is a very, very difficult thing to do. Now, Trump, it seems to me, is in an unusual position because he has come into the presidency as a complete outsider. He is outsider to the political class, to the deep state, if you like. He took them on and he beat them, and he beat them with the astonishing support of, you know, people, the voters, right across the United States. A movement was built around him, which supported him through all of this. And that does give him a degree of freedom of action and an ability to make decisions that other presidents in the past have not had. The question is whether he uses it or whether he squanders it. Now, if he lets himself get drawn into, the minutiae of where the conflict lines in Ukraine are, whether he starts getting bogged down in negotiations in that kind of way, then over time, the permanent state, all of those officials, the people, the allies, the Europeans, the Ukrainians themselves, will start to capture him. He'll find that he's drawn back into that world of unending confrontation. What he needs to do is to make clear strategic decisions now, making a break from all of that and charting a different course. And I think if he does, he will have the support of most Americans.
Yeah. Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Alexander summed it up very well. I mean, just try to, he decided he wants to negotiate this thing. Okay, try to negotiate it. Try to figure it out. If you can't get this on track in the next couple of weeks or couple of months, whatever, then yeah, get the messaging down where you say, look, I tried, and this is going to the Europeans now, the UK and the Europeans.
Yeah.
This is on their borders. We have a big ocean. That's people understand that we have a big ocean between us, and we've already lost so much money in Ukraine. We're cutting our losses, and Stammer wants this, and Macron wants this, so I'm going to give it to them. And that's probably that may be the most likely outcome too in the end. The whole trying to pull Russia and apart from China and all of that talk. I mean, I just don't buy any of that. I don't think any of that's going to happen. And I think there's one big reason why that's not going to happen, because this time around, you also have a Europe and a European Union, which absolutely despises Russia, hates Russia with a passion. So I don't think there's going to be any shift of allegiances. I think we're heading into this with BRICS on one side. I think we have the collective West, a broken, beaten up collective West. I think the big question mark here is, are we talking about collective West with the United States in it? Or are we talking about collective West with the United States not in it? Just kind of on the periphery. Maybe ruling over the collective West, but not really so involved. Just kind of treating them like vassals when they need to treat them like vassals, and then not dealing with them when they don't want to deal with them. So I think that's the big question mark. I just don't see any type of breaking China away from Russia or anything like that, because at the end of the day, Russia and China understand that even if they have good relations with the United States, Europe absolutely despises them in a way that I never imagined in my lifetime. It's shocked me the amount of hatred that the Europeans have towards the Russians.
I completely agree. Can I just quickly address the issue of Vietnamization? Obviously, there are some similarities in that the United States is pulling out and the Europeans want to take in and all that. But it's not the parallel is not identical, because the Americans, thankfully, have never actually fought the Russians in Ukraine. I mean, if they had done, then it would have been an absolute calamity. But then you might have been able to talk about, the parallel of Vietnamization. The fact is, the French, the Germans, the British, these claim to be important powers. The European Union, as I very well remember, just a few years, not so long ago, was talking about how it was going to become the digital champion in the world, that it was going to become the great new superpower and all of that. I mean, it seems to me that if the Europeans can't get their act together and hold back the Russians in Ukraine, Well, I don't think that's something that Americans need to beat themselves up over. I mean, I don't think that people will make the same parallels that they did with, the fact that the South Vietnamese army collapsed, or that President Ghani's army in Afghanistan, just melted away, and all that kind of thing. I don't think people will, in the United States, will take that too seriously, actually.
Right. Well, we have just a few minutes, so I want to bring up, just as quickly as you want to answer them, there are a few questions. One from Matthew. Do you foresee a wider war here, or reality overtake the rhetoric?
I think we're moving away from the risk of a wider war. I mean, one can't say ever that it's gone completely, because while this war continues, there's always the risk. And of course, Zelensky and the people around him might become desperate, and they might try and involve others. But that very, very frightening situation that we had this time last year, when Macron was talking of sending troops to Ukraine, this is, without a ceasefire or negotiations of any kind. And there was talk about launching missiles into Russia. We seem at least to be past all that now, and with the normalization of relations between the Americans and the Russians, or at least the process to try and do that, I think we've come away from that, the most dangerous point of that, for the time being.
Alex, any thoughts on the question?
I agree with that. I think we do have to give credit to the Trump administration, because we do have dialogue. Yeah, at least we're talking, which is a huge improvement than what we had with Biden. So I mean, that is something, and that's something very big. And I go back to the UN vote, which I know Alexander covered in detail in his video the other day, and I don't think a lot of analysts, a lot of people are talking about it. I think that UN vote was huge.
Absolutely,
I mean, the US and Russia voting together against France and Britain. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, no, that's it is really important to note, as far as critical as I am of Trump, of the Washington administration, of Washington, of the empire, having dialogue, even if you don't believe whatever you believe is going to happen in the future, you don't believe it's going to pan out or anything like that, it does set the stage. It does mean something. Talking, actually, I think I've heard you, Alexander, say this, that words do matter. So, but if you are you're engaged in negotiations, that's an action that actually matters, and it may not change the course of U.S. foreign policy in perpetuity, but it may very well impact history quite profoundly. This is a question. I don't even know how one answers this question. What are predictions for 2028? I assume this person, Isaac, is talking about the United States. I don't even know how you answer that. If you guys want to take a stab at that for
4 years. I mean, a British Prime Minister said that a week is a long time in politics. 4 years is an age. My own view is that, for the moment at least, the Trump team have the momentum. The Democrats are in chaos. Things are happening and changing very, very fast. The team has a very capable vice president in J.D. Vance, who I think would be a formidable candidate in an election in 2028. The big risks that they have going forward are two. Firstly, the possibility of a recession in the United States. And there is serious concerns about this. I would put that not down to the tariffs, by the way, or any of that, but to the accumulated problems that have been building up and which have reached really dangerous levels as a result of the policies that Biden administration has took, the reckless money emission, the chaos done to the international trading system by the sanctions, the way in which they've disrupted the whole energy trade through very ill thought out sanctions. Anyway, that could be catching up now, and we might see a recession. People won't say, if it happens, this is Biden's fault. They'll say the man in charge is Donald Trump. He could get the blame for that. That is one danger. The other danger is if Trump really does mismanage this business of Ukraine, if he starts spending all his time trying to deal with it and fix it and owns it like the way Nixon came to own Vietnam, and then it all collapses when the Russian army marches into Kiev, that could also sink him too, or rather sink the Republicans too. So these are the two things that the administration, the Trump people, need to worry about. If they handle the situation well, if they can avoid a recession and avoid getting sucked into Ukraine, then I would say that for the moment things look promising.
How about you, Alex? Do you have any predictions?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Vance is the person that everyone is looking at on the Republican side of things. Lift those sanctions, man. Lift the energy sanctions. Get rid of those sanctions. Get rid of these travel bans and all of this nonsense between Russia and the West. It's just stupid. All of the media censorship, the Russian media that's censored in the West as well. All of this is just dumb. But definitely lift the energy sanctions, and maybe we can get some of the prices to go down. But Vance definitely on the Republican side. On the Democrat side, I don't know. I'll take a wild guess. Crazy prediction. Maybe Annalena Baerbock, 2028. I don't know. That would be interesting. Why not? Maybe she'll buy one of the golden passports for $5 million. And I don't know. Maybe that'll get her to the White House.
It's just, well, I think you both mentioned the Democratic Party is in complete shambles, and long time to go. I can't make any predictions because I don't even know. I've been just thinking in my head about the condition of the political party apparatus here in the United States, and I don't know if it's going to look the same by the time we get to 2028. Very well be that the Democrats are in such bad shape that, like in other parts in history in the United States, it retools and reshapes and is called something completely differently and plays maybe a similar policy game, but talks a different way, tries to act a different way. And then, of course, with the Trump administration, yes, if we were to hold an election in the next week or month, there would probably be no problems for the Trump administration. But yes, 4 years, a long time. And I think those economic concerns, they're bubbling up big time. And the Trump administration hasn't articulated a policy that will actually rectify these things. I think you had Michael Hudson on your show, right? He's articulated tariffs, which are not at this moment in history likely going to reverse the problems. Maybe they'll increase some problems. And then the Doja cuts and all these things could actually exacerbate problems. I don't cry about USAID or these programs or even getting rid of waste, especially administratively with the intelligence apparatus and various other agencies that ordinary Americans have absolutely no understanding of that they even exist even. But cuts to everything could very well lead to an exacerbation of economic crisis. And then when that economic crisis comes, yes, it is Donald Trump's, because the policies have been laid bare and the association will be there. So my prediction would be let's check in about it in 2 to 4 years. But all right, guys, you've been very generous with your time. I just want to thank everyone who gave a super chat. Thank you to Shaker. Thank you to Nicholas. Thank you to Mata Bear. We didn't get to answer all the questions. We already answered this question basically. Thanks to Chili Pepper for that. I don't know if you guys saw that. Alex or Alexander. Oh, geez, it's cringy. It's very cringy.
Yeah,
it's very cringy. We'll check it out. I'm sure
it was. Yeah, I mean, another mistake. These are not important mistakes, provided the strategy is right. And the risk with Trump is that the tactics will submerge the strategy, and then the mistakes will matter.
Yes. All right, everybody. So I gave you. I just want to put up all the super chats on the screen. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Alexander and Alex, for spending time with me this afternoon. I really appreciate it. Is there any final comments you want to make before we head out of here?
No, it's been an excellent program. I'm glad you watched Michael Hudson's program. Just to quickly say, his point about tariffs, he's not against tariffs in principle, but he says they have to be brought in as part of an overall economic restructuring of the way in which the United States is run. And his concern is that there isn't a plan for that at the moment. There might be. So let's not rush and assume it's all going to fail before it fails. And bear in mind that Musk, who is next to Trump, whatever you may think of Musk, I mean, he's a man who's shown that he does do industry well. He does do manufacturing. He understands it. And presumably he will have an input into what's going to happen. We'll see.
Thanks, Danny, for having us on.
Yes,
thanks to the chat. Your chat is pretty cool. So thanks to your chat. I'm kind of reading the chat as we've been discussing. So they have a lot of interesting, cool comments as well and good analysis. And look us up on our channels, on Alexander's channel, on my channel, and on the Duran on all the platforms. And a big shout out to our locals community as well. I had the locals chat open as well. So hello to everyone that's watching us on locals in the locals chat. The Duran.locals.com.
All right. Yes. And everyone, you can find the Duran in the video description. Be sure to hit the like button before you all leave. That'll keep the stream going. And the video description is all the places you can support here, Patreon, Substack, and much more. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.